Hello, and welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Network podcast, where everyone belongs, especially those of you who think you don't. My name is Chris Grundeman, and this is the Doug Madory episode, which I think you'll love. Doug is the Director of Internet Analysis for Kentik, where he works on internet infrastructure analysis. The Washington Post dubbed him the man who can see the internet for his reputation in identifying significant developments in the global layout of the internet. Doug is regularly quoted by major news outlets about developments ranging from national blackouts to BGP hijacks to the activation of submarine cables. Prior to Kentik, he was the lead analyst for Oracle's Internet Intelligence team, which was before that Dying Research, and before that was Renesys. So yeah, long career internet observability. Hey Doug, would you like to introduce yourself a bit further to the Imposter Syndrome Network?
I think you got it. Yeah, I've been at this since about 2009, starting with Renesys, and I've been doing something very similar during all that time, and I still do the same kind of thing now.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. As far as I know, you have at least 3 patents with your name on them out there. While I was working at Cable Labs, I had the opportunity to file and ultimately receive several patents myself. So I know a little bit about the process and kind of what goes into that and kind of how that plays out. But I have to assume that many, maybe even most of our listeners have never really had that pleasure/pain. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what it's like to identify an innovation as something that is even worthy of trying to file, and then the process of, I don't want to give it away too much, but explaining that to lawyers and getting the whole thing filed. And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that process.
Well, I'm the beneficiary of other people doing a lot of that work. So, and just to give some background on that, when you're at, I think those were mostly filed when I was with Dyne, so Dyne DNS. When you're at startups, patents become important to, kind of prove some intellectual property. And, if you're in the process of you're getting courted for an acquisition or something, it's nice to have patents that show that you've got things that you. And so we were in the process of innovating lots of stuff around internet measurement and creating lots of techniques for doing. I think we've got one geolocation, traffic steering. At one point, Renesys had one of the first patent on BGP monitoring, because it's quite broad. I'm sure it's completely unenforceable now. If you're in a brand new space, then you might want to you create a new product in that space. You make you get a patent, and then I think that patent still exists. But I'm not a patent lawyer, so I don't know how valuable those things are. Like I said, I just would read through what the folks who were responsible for submitting those would write and make some corrections, but I didn't have to do a lot of the work. So I have to confess that I had the benefit of someone else doing more the tedious, administrative stuff there.
Nice. That's always good. Yeah. When I was at Cable Labs, we did have like legal counsel who did the majority of the work, but I found just the experience of explaining our technical innovation to a lawyer and then seeing how he wrote that up and gave it back to us. And then we had to kind of try and figure out if what he said was actually technically accurate or not. Was just an interesting process to see the two languages kind of being merged there. Yeah.
So I remember doing that. Like I said, I think there was a motivation from the company leadership that if we've got a bunch of innovations, which we were like constantly inventing things, get some in patent form. And so then I think we figured out a few that were worthy of that. And then my name got added to those.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. As far as skipping right up to now, I think we'll go back through some of that work in between, but you're the Director of Internet Analysis at Kentik for the last few years now. And obviously that kind of, as we talked about in the intro, right, that's an extension of work you've been doing for a long, long time. But it's still a very, I think, unique title. There's probably not very many Director of Internet Analysis
it's just me. It's just me.
in the world even. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that means. What does the Director of Internet Analysis do?
Yeah, sure. So I made up that title, I think when I was at Dyne, and partly because, so when it was Renesys and it was just, like 20 some folks. So the Renesys, for people who didn't know, it's a very small startup, did BGP monitoring, one of the early, startups doing BGP monitoring, BGP analysis. We had products based on this. I had gotten hired into the company to do like data QA, all the things the existing technical experts didn't really want to deal with. So writing stuff was kind of a chore, and they didn't want to. So I would take that on, doing data QA to try to figure out where are we misclassifying things, some of the grunt work. And then I got into it. Yeah, I thought it was a really fascinating topic. I could spend a lot of time going through all this data and living in it, and then got to be pretty good at it. So then we didn't really have titles because we were such a small company. So then, when I would go and present at a conference, they'd be like, all right, you need to have a title. And I'm like, all right. And so I was thinking of like previous jobs that I'd done. So at one point I was senior analyst because that was a title I had in the past. It also kind of suggests maybe there's multiple analysts and I'm the senior one, but in reality, I was the only one. And then I think while we're at Dyn, I was giving, for a little while, when I would go to submarine cable conferences and do talks there, I was pretty tight with the guys from telegeography, and they had really impressive titles. And they were a similarly small company of 20 something people, and they were either director of this or vice president of that. And I was like, I think I need a more impressive sounding title. So, and they're like, you can have whatever you want. I'm like, all right, well, how about director of internet analysis? Because I feel like that's the most. I don't remember what the rejected options there, but so we settled on. And no, there isn't, to my knowledge, there's not another director of internet analysis out there. And I kind of I've not through these acquisitions and then moving to Kentik, I just kept the same title, and it's kind of just me that does the particular thing that I do.
So what does that look like today? I mean, maybe what's a day in the life of the director of internet analysis these days?
Yeah, I guess on my schedule, so I've got a couple of conference presentations coming up. I'll be speaking at Nanog and Apricot. Last week I was in Atlanta for a couple of talks, and so there's a fair amount of presenting some of the insights that we develop or we can see in our data. I think where this comes from is that our company, like others, we're in the data business, and there's a lot of fascinating insights that lie dormant and undiscovered in all of our data, especially when you can aggregate it across multiple companies. And so, my job is to try to use that data to try to understand greater things about the internet or advise, how can we improve our products to capture some more insights it's clearly there's a way to do it out of the data. There's an insight in the data we're missing. I guess I've got both an internal type of work where I work with our own product managers to try to use the experience I had from those previous companies doing similar stuff, and then my knowledge of the data that we've got, the internet measurement data. At Kentik, we have a lot of NetFlow, advise our products, and then also another form of that is to present at conferences or speak to the media. There's like a public side of that. Yeah, so I don't know. On any given day, it definitely skips around from one day to the next. But a lot of the tools to do both the advisement on product management or the analysis that ends up in conferences or in the media, a lot of those capabilities are similar. There's a lot of overlap there. So the same set of data, the same set of tools can accomplish those varying tasks, as well as I work with some of our sales folks as well to do data prospecting to figure out, like, all right, somebody we're engaged with, and it's always puts us on a good footing if we can come up with some kind of insight that they didn't know about their own network that we can see, and then we just whether they can buy that capability or not, at least puts us in a ground that we're a capable company. We have a lot of depth. We've got this would seem we have this bullpen of experts that can draw from. It's not a fly-by-night operation. We're pretty smart folks that look out for others on the internet. So there's also a third function that's sales enablement, some kind of sales assists. And I like sales because that's how I get paid. I want the sales guys to sell their stuff. So I want the company to be successful. So it's a team effort. But yeah, I kind of bounce around between those three different categories in a given day, and I try to use my judgment to figure out how can I help the company the best on any given day.
Awesome. Yeah, that's nice. I like that, bit of freedom there. And I appreciate that perspective around sales. I think that in network engineering and maybe IT more broadly, digital infrastructure in general, like a lot of technology professionals don't quite make that connection. I think, at least in my experience, there's been a lot of friction at a lot of places I've worked between sales teams and engineering teams. And I think ultimately realizing that, like, if you want a new router, if you want a new switch, if you want a new, server, a new storage array, your salespeople have to go do their job. you want to get paid, your salespeople need to go do their job.
Yeah.
So supporting them is pretty important, actually.
I think it's you reach a stage of enlightenment. And you're like, oh, salespeople aren't dirty. Salespeople are how all of this works. Like
Right.
this is all private enterprise. This is all a very successful industry because you've got smart salespeople making, it's not just all, I think there's I think in general, culturally, we have an aversion that, like salespeople are trying to, as a used car salesman, trying to trick you into buying something you're not supposed to, like that is not a good attitude to take. There's a lot of value that, sales folks offer the industry. So I'm pro sales. I would like our guys to be making sales every day.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's good to maybe make those distinctions, right? I mean, this is kind of maybe the classic problem of stereotypes or categorization or things. I think that there's probably some really terrible salespeople out there who you don't really want to talk to. They're going to, pick your pocket. Just like there's probably bad engineers who you don't want to let in your network or they're going to break something. But there's also a lot of good in both areas.
Yeah. Like our companies don't exist if we don't have solid salespeople. And that's a skill unto itself of just understanding, how to set a price, to negotiate, be able to ready to walk away. All that there's like a psychological thing. So a great salesperson is so useful.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier. I think kind of when you had that kind of first, senior analyst role or analyst role at Renesys, and I think what you said is you kind of started doing, my words, like some of the grunt work, right? Some of the stuff that other folks who were there didn't want to do. And then that kind of like, I think maybe exposed you to some of this, kind of deeper analysis work and that kind of, I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit more about that process of kind of going from, coming in as the new guy and doing the work that needed to be done to kind of driving that into doing work you really wanted to do, which I think is what happened.
Yeah. So I arrived, like I said, in 2009 to Renesys. Again, I got described to me a few, data QA types things that we did. AS relationship classification that occasionally was wrong. We have to understand why it was wrong, and to understand why it's wrong is you have to also understand how does it work? How does the internet work? How does internet routing work to understand when something's wrong? And then, I felt like I would just ask a lot of questions to the folks that were there. And I also kind of thought like, all right, well, since I'm completely new to this domain, I just need to, for like in my head, I was like, all right, well, I just need to put like 6 months of just reading papers, reading other people, like asking questions, and then also like being willing to be wrong and saying like, I think, is this, did I get this right? And you're like, no, you got it wrong. And here's why. Like, okay, let me keep at it. And just knowing this might take a little while to get the hang of. And then I think with the data analysis, at some point I arrived at a point where I realized that I'm spending a lot more time in the data and trying to understand what's happening in our data than anybody else. So we have, PhDs, software engineers and stuff that are writing our production code that assumes a lot of things are going to work like they're supposed to work. And then I'm in the data saying like, no, like I've got counter examples here that don't fit our understanding. And so it's like the same techniques that are used for data QA to find problems are also the same techniques that are used to find big novel discoveries. You've got something that doesn't fit your expected pattern. So either it's an error that needs to be fixed, or you've stumbled onto something that's really interesting. Either one is good for me. And I think my whole time there, before I left Oracle in 2020, I never stopped doing data QA. Like geolocation QA was that's something you have to do forever. Like it's a problem that'll never be solved. But I found it kind of cathartic sometimes just to go in and just get into the data and find all the, we had techniques to identify and correct misgeolocations. I go in there and just like, just spend some time. Again, like I said, I would find like really fascinating errors that I'd be correcting and be like, wow, how did this happen? And I've learned something about, a new entity on the internet that's doing some sort of like B4 broker sales or something where the address space from one country is moving to another. And that's a really interesting development. It's beyond just data QA. It's just now you're discovering something that's a behavior of the internet that people didn't know about. So yeah, I'm big on data. I don't know why there aren't more people who do this at companies like ours, of, this idea of you start off with data QA, but then build up your ability to do analysis and then support the company by public outreach, writing blogs, doing presentations, and then also, helping advise product management. I think it's with all that data, there's kind of untapped potential there for other people to do similar work, I think.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And I think you're right. Now that I'm thinking about that, right? I mean, more and more, so many businesses, all kinds of different businesses are collecting more and more data. And I mean, I guess I assume they're at least using it internally, but maybe not as much and definitely not very much external.
I guess what I find is that, and this is true, I don't know, there's a lot of like, it's one thing to build the tool and to collect the data, and there's this assumption that somebody's going to figure out something out of all this data that we've collected. And, I don't know that that's always true. I think a lot of we're collecting data for data's sake, and we're building tools sometimes, and people aren't using them. And I guess I'm here to lobby for that. The role of an analyst is really important, because that is sometimes a skill set all unto itself to go into a data set and figure out what's interesting, and then be able to tell that story to other folks is I think it's an underappreciated skill set, and I intend to be doing it until the day I die.
Awesome. Yeah, very cool. So rewinding back a little bit, I'm really interested in, I think, one, I know you kind of, or at least my understanding is you kind of got into technology in the Air Force, but I don't know if it maybe even starts before then. Was technology something that was a part of your childhood, or where did that, tech bug really bite?
Yeah, it was. So I grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, and my dad worked at IBM, so the mainframe plant there. And so he designed mainframes for IBM, wrote low-level code for that. So we had, in the 1980s, we would have computers in the house, and that was kind of unusual at that time. We had a Texas Instruments computer, so not IBM, but I remember my older brother typing programs in from, used to get a magazine, and you would like in the mag, you'd like transcribed games and stuff out of the pages of the magazine, and you have to hand type these in and save them onto cassette tapes. So we always had all these like 10-minute cassette tapes around the house. And I actually wasn't doing that. I was kind of like just a spare pair of hands for my brother who was doing it. I'd go and fetch another 10-minute tape, or I just watch him, do that. And then we'd play the game afterwards. So yeah, I guess that connection with my father, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention my mom as well. So obviously my dad is probably where I saw a lot of technical stuff and computers. My mom is not technical remotely. She is someone who's fascinated with journalism. So she was the first female graduate of the School of Journalism at the University of Missouri, and always had worked in that space for a while. And I think I am an interesting mix of those two passions now, having this public function of giving quotes to the media or breaking stories, that kind of thing. I think there's a technical piece to it, and there's some sort of a version of journalism in there as well. So I like to think I'm a blend of those two backgrounds.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I like that a lot. And that's interesting. I think I've found a lot of, I guess, insights in learning more about journalism and kind of the practice of journalism, and the idea of kind of finding the lead and understanding. And I don't know, there's some really interesting aspects of journalism that I think translate well to at least communication around technology, but in general, and finding better ways to communicate. That's pretty cool. So from there, I mean, I guess, coming out of the Air Force, maybe we want to talk a little bit about your experience in the Air Force. I think you were a chief of Unix administration, which sounds pretty awesome. I don't know what that is though.
Yeah, this like military terminology. So I attended the University of Virginia. I went to engineering school there on a ROTC scholarship to pay for school. Like we just didn't have. I don't know. It's weird to look. I've got teenage boys now, and we're looking at college. Thinking ahead to college, and the amount that we were worried about in the 1990s to go to college is like 1 year.
We've got an order of magnitude change in the generation here, at least, right?
It's really hard to. It's going to sound strange to people now to be like, oh, I didn't think I could afford, $10,000-$20,000 a year. Anyway, so I got applied for, and I got a full ride from the U.S. Air Force to pay for all my school. I benefited a lot from that. But when I got into the Air Force, my first job was in San Antonio, Texas, at what was at the time Kelly Air Force Base. Now it's part of Lackland Air Force Base. And it was at the Information Warfare Center, which now it's changed its name, I don't know, 6 times. I don't know what it's called now. The role was very analogous to what you would find in an IT network admin shop. So, even though I wore, camo into work, the first year was just learning Cisco gear, pulling cable and ceilings, and just doing all the things a network engineer would do. Did the certification track. They had money for training, so I went to those 1 week, Cisco classes and got up to CCNP, before I kind of stopped working on that stuff. In my second year, we had a few different teams in that group. There was a network admin guys, which is where I started. There was a Windows or Microsoft admin team, and there was a Unix admin team that was like the black sheep. Like nobody wanted to be a part of that, and it wasn't in good shape. And then at some point, I made a comment to the head guy, and I was like, I'd work there. I'd be in charge of that, or I'd be interested in doing that stuff. And they're like, really? Like you'd want Unix? And I was like, yeah, no, I would want that. Like you're crazy. And they're like, oh, give it to me. And then so then we ended up. I was the head of that. Like the terminology was cheap, just like some kind of that's a lower form of a leadership position in the Air Force. But so I was the head as a junior officer. I was the head of like I think we had a civilian, a couple of enlisted, a couple of contractors. So we had just a small group. But it was one of my happiest times of just we had like really sharp folks. We were a really good team. We turned this thing around, and by the time I left, like everybody wanted to be a part of the Unix team, and we had just a lot of team pride that just went from like I said, it was not in good shape when we inherited it.
Yeah,
and we cleaned it up, and anyway, it was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I've worked on 1 or 2 teams that kind of felt like that, where everything kind of gelled and we got a lot of stuff done and made some progress. And just like at the time, I don't know that I recognized how amazing that was.
Same.
But looking back,
same. In fact, I think that was partly when I was trying to decide where to go in my career. I was like, well, I like being a small team of sharp people. We all had something that we're extra good at, but then we could rely on each other. I was like that's the also I ended up learning so much in that kind of environment as well, which is like killer. More than you can read in a textbook or attend in a class. If you've got a team of sharp people and everybody's working together, and the right type of environment like that is so crucial. And like I said, you just learn so fast when you're in a good team like that. So then I remember thinking, later on, trying to decide where I was like, well, I would like to be. I don't have to be in charge. I can do it if I need to, but I like being in that small team environment where everybody's dependent on each other. And then, after that, I did well there. I got a bunch of accolades. And so then they gave me a command position. I was in a air control squadron, which is basically a ground radar, mobile radar unit that deploys into a combat environment, setting up radar to control the airspace. And then, so I was in charge of all the communications, and I had 55 enlisted folks in my flight were under me, including another guy who's in the industry, Sean Legan, he's at Juniper. He was one of my airmen, which is kind of funny that we're now in the industry together. But yeah, we were in Italy. I was stationed at Aviano Air Base in Italy for 3 years doing that. And ultimately, we ended up going, Sean and I and the rest of the group, ended up going to Iraq in the first year of the war. As challenging as that was from a technical standpoint, it was actually it was a positive experience. We had like very hard things to do. We had a lot of smart people to do it. Small teams of elite folks that were really good at what they were doing. And so I gained a lot from that. It was a positive experience.
Awesome. That's really cool. And as you're talking about that, I'm struck by, my memories also of kind of some of these like similar experiences with small teams. And they usually we were working close together, not just on projects or, like on the things we were working on, but also physically in the same space. And, I wonder a little bit about whether the world we're in now, this post-COVID world, I guess, right? Post-pandemic world, where distributed work has been really adopted by a lot of companies, and people are really kind of demanding it, which, I've kind of fought for my whole career, but there may be a missing ingredient of that, collaboration and camaraderie. I don't know what your thoughts are on remote work and how that affects, people getting started and working together. And
yeah, I think about it a lot. I mean, the company I'm at now, Kentik, we don't even have an office anymore. I think they let the lease run out in SF in 2020 because everybody was home and just hasn't been a need. Plus, everyone's distributed all over the world, so there's huge upsides to that. Like I can sit in a random place in New Hampshire and work in any of these companies, so that's a huge benefit to me personally. But I guess I think a lot about when I was with Renesys and Dyn, I oversaw our internship program, and I think I had maybe 15 or 16 interns over the summer interns over the years. I really liked doing it. I liked working with the young folks, and everybody benefited from it. I got a lot out of it. The kids got a lot out of it. And we would never allow a remote intern. Like we were at that time, we had an office in Hanover, New Hampshire, and we would require that the person, it's a college town, so they would get a sublet from some college kid and come into the office and then just be there for all of the spontaneous conversations and just spontaneous anything. If nothing else, just to witness this, small band of technical misfits, just living their best life. Like I think it's just great for a young person to see, like, oh, well, that could be me, and I could follow one of these paths or do this kind of work, and I'd be really happy and joyful. And then, around lunch, they'd ask questions about, like, should they go to grad school? Should they do this or that? And, collect up people's opinions, just varied opinions on these things. And very hard to recreate that in a remote environment. I feel like myself now, having worked, gone into office for 2.5 decades before going remote, I miss that less. I need that less. But I think a lot about the young folks coming up and how do they get those experiences, and I wonder if they're not missing out on what some of us benefited from. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's something I think worth calling out, because I don't know how I would do an intern right now, because it really helped to be able to pull the guy in the office and just draw a bunch of stuff on the dry erase board and just, like, do you get everything? Do you not? I could just, and then go off on some tangent, like, and there's no, like, I don't need to hop off the Zoom call. We're just in the office together. And if we end up, the conversation goes somewhere random, so be it. But anyway, I don't know the answer to that, but it's something I think we should be thoughtful about.
Yeah, joint whiteboard sessions are maybe the one thing I miss about going into an office with other people. For sure, that's interesting. One thing, I mean, maybe this is just devil's advocate, but, I wonder if the reason there is some nostalgia for how we were introduced to these communities through being physically present is just that nostalgia. And maybe there are, maybe people will just adapt to finding ways to be interns remotely. I don't know if that's true or not. Right?
Maybe. I think it can be kind of difficult. There's something kind of intuitive when you physically go into an office and as opposed to,
you overhear things, you catch people's eye.
But maybe you're right. Maybe people will adapt, and then I'm the one with the problem. That it's my lack of vision to see how this isn't an issue. Maybe that's it. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't know. Because I've also thought about, and this is maybe totally different, but in my mind related, the idea of kind of network automation and things like that, where the more we automate, because a lot of what we're automating is this kind of grunt work, which is a lot of what we had like IT help desks do or are doing today. And if you automate some of that grunt work away, then like, how do new people get into this stuff and get exposed to all these things? If you've just got, machines taking care of all the basic stuff, then there's you've broken this learning path in some ways, which is different, but kind of a similar problem, I think. I don't know.
No, it is similar. And we were living in this moment in technology, and this has been a process going for many years. With our cars, there was a time when people were a little more skillful at fixing their own stuff, and now we're not. We have lost that skill, but we're still getting the car from point A to point B, and we just take it to the mechanic for maybe some things that we can fix on our own, or maybe they've gotten too complicated, too computerized for us to have a shot at it. Yeah, I don't know. I think about that as well. It is kind of related, but maybe it's not as big of an issue as we're making it out to be.
We'll probably find out.
Yeah.
I think one way or another. Yeah. So speaking of that, like in that kind of how things kind of played out. I mean, is there anything looking back over your career? Is there anything you would change about how things went down from kind of the very beginnings to now, if you could?
I don't know. That's a tough question. Because all of your experiences, your present you or the accumulation of all your experiences, good or bad. And I don't know. I guess I've had a couple things that are like, I probably would have, before I got into Renesys, I was working at a hospital doing IT security, and it just wasn't a great situation without getting into a tangent. And I think I recognized that pretty early on, but I thought I could just, push through it and win, some sort of inter-office rivalry. And I think as an older man, I can look back and be like, no, there was a problem. It wasn't going to get fixed, and it was time to leave. And I probably could have left earlier. I don't know. I really don't dwell on those kind of things very much, because even some of the bad experiences you have are helpful to inform your outlook on, make you appreciate when it's good. And yeah, I don't know. There probably are, but like I said, I don't dwell on that as far as regrets.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. I tend to live the same way. The only regret I do have is that we are out of time for today. Doug, do you have any projects or causes or anything you'd like the folks listening to know about or pointers to things that are going on?
Let's see. Well, right now, one of the focuses that I'm interested in is routing security, so BGP security. And I've given a lot of talks in the last, couple of years on where we're at there. And I guess I would say with RPKI ROV, which is, our latest security mechanism, I think it's arrived at a point where if you're not already rejecting invalids and signing routes, you should be, because there's a lot of benefit. It doesn't solve all the problems, but even this outage that we had with Orange España a few weeks ago kind of shows the power of classifying a route as invalid, because it really will get blotted out of the internet, and that wasn't always the case. That's a fairly recent thing. So anyway, I think improving routing security is something I care a lot about. I write a lot about it, and we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot there that we haven't solved. So that's my technical area of interest.
Yeah, it makes sense. +1 to paying attention there. Well, Doug, thank you so much for sharing your story with the Imposter Syndrome Network. And thank you to all of our listeners for your time, your attention, and your support. If you found this episode insightful or interesting, or even just entertaining, please consider paying it forward by letting others know about this show and the great guests we have on. Before we shut the lights off, Doug, I am curious, maybe flipping that question I asked a little bit ago on its side a little bit. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned throughout your career from your perspective now?
Oh, let's see. I don't know if this is the most valuable, but maybe I'll just give an insight into like conference going stuff. So I think when I first started going to NANOGs, like 15 years ago, I felt like it felt a little cliquey. It felt very intimidating as a new person. And I think it's gotten better over the years. There was certainly a time when you'd have questioners come up, and I won't name any names, but they'd say bullshit to your whole thing and cut you to pieces. I think it's gotten not as tough as it once was. And I kind of steer clear of it for a little while as a result of that. Now I'm someone who's a little more established in that space. One thing that I do, and maybe other people can do this too, is if you're at a social thing and you're at a lunch and you see somebody sitting by themselves, often like maybe a younger person who doesn't know a lot of people at the conference, like go sit with them, go over and introduce yourself, because 99 times out of 100 they're going to be so appreciative, and a lot of these people are actually really smart and have a lot to contribute. So it's something I learned when I was going to security conferences, which is not my area, and I don't know anybody there, but I'm self-assured enough to just go up and be like, all right, I'll pick somebody who doesn't seem like they know anybody and go up and talk to them. And I've made a lot of great contacts that way. So that's not the biggest lesson, I think, but it's good because we have an industry where you're going to have a lot of people who are not as outgoing as others, but they've got lots to offer, even if they're new to the space. So I know I do that. I make a point of doing that now, and I think others should as well. Of just like go up and go talk to these folks, because I think they would come away with a much more positive experience, and both y'all are going to benefit a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree with that. That's great advice. And we'll be back next week. As far as social accounts go, or like show note links, I've got your LinkedIn, your Twitter. I threw your Wikipedia page link on here. Is there anything else you'd like to have in the show notes?
That's it. I honestly, I don't do that much social.
Fair enough. Yeah, I've been definitely dwindling less and less and less for the last maybe like 8 years now, I guess.
Yeah.